This is the USAACE-8, 8 minutes with an Army Aviation subject matter expert. Let's fly with the topic, emergency response methodology.
I'm Major General Dave Francis, Commanding General of the Army Aviation Center of Excellence in Fort Rucker.
CW5 Myke Lewis, the Command Chief Warrant Officer for the Aviation Branch.
What drove the need for changing emergency response methodology?
Since the beginning of Army Aviation, and particularly since Vietnam, we have not significantly changed the way we execute emergency procedures in Army Aviation. We've been relying on rote memory and having to execute underlined steps by rote memory. And what we have found is that our aircraft have become more complex, and the amount of those underlined steps increased, that under duress, our crews were not being able to identify the correct emergency procedure or apply the correct emergency procedure to deal with a problem. And so as our aircraft have advanced and become more complex, they've also become better at telling us what's wrong with it. And so as we prepare to lower our flight profile as we look to large-scale combat operations, it was essential that we have a better way with dealing emergency procedures in context of how they're happening. And so Vice going to this rote memorization process that has caused us to fly perfectly good aircraft into the ground, we took a step back and developed this procedure and this methodology to help us better react to emergencies and focus on flying the aircraft and correctly identifying the emergency procedure at hand.
What will this change about Army Aviation?
First thing we're going to be able to do is slow down in the cockpit. With the redundant systems, dual pilot versus the single pilot, we have the opportunity to slow down and actually fly the aircraft before we start reacting to an emergency.
And what that's going to enable us to do is do better at aircrew coordination. So when we slow things down, we focus on keeping the aircraft in the air and allowing our crews to operate in the way they are trained and the way that our aircraft are built to handle these emergencies is going to be significantly improved. And we've already seen that pan out as we've instituted this across the Army starting last May.
This was implemented in 2 phases. What were the phases and where do we stand with those phases now?
Well, we had 2 phases. Phase 1 is when we updated the Shared Rotary Wing Task 1070, and that is, react to emergency procedures. That was for all MDSs across the board. And then we implemented the FADEC-F. And the FADEC-F is fly the aircraft, alert the crew, diagnose the emergency, execute and communicate, and then continue to fly the aircraft. And in Phase 2, we came up with the tools. So that was the methodology. Then we came up with the tools for Phase 2. Phase 2 were the FRCs, the flight reference cards. And what we had was the Book 1 and the Book 2.
And what I would say is that we extensively tested this thing. This has been other nations have been doing this methodology. The civilian airlines have been executing this methodology for some time, and we are in the process of doing that across the Army right now. And what I think is going to be very, very successful for us is the ability to, like Mike said, slow down the crews, be able to fly the aircraft, execute good crew coordination, identify the correct emergency, execute the correct emergency procedure, and continue to fly that aircraft. And that's going to be essential as we lower our flight profiles.
What feedback have we received on this change?
Everything's been positive so far. We have our Director of Evaluation Standardization. They go out, they get feedback on the emergency response methodology. And so far, it's been overwhelmingly positive. Some of the quotes that we have are, it's been a long time coming. This turns the technique into a standard. Another one we heard was, that's the way we've done it for years, but our air crews and instructors have less experience now, so this gives them a tool to get to where we've been. And the other one is, this culture shift will save lives.
And I would add to that I got a comment from an old Army aviator from the Vietnam era that said, I thought we always did it this way. And another quote that said, well, this is the way the good guys have always been doing it. We're just writing it down now. So the most effective instructors have intuitively been doing this. We've now documented it, and it is part of the standard that you'll be trained at from flight school throughout the rest of your career. And it is implemented across the Army as we speak, across the active component, the National Guard, and reserves.
Is this change to ERM a part of a larger effort?
Absolutely. So this is just one of the many steps that Army Aviation is going through to transition our force from a counterinsurgency type operation where we've had the ability to fly at 1,500 to 2,000 feet in relatively uncontested arenas from an air dominance point of view. We know that our future threats are going to require us to fly lower, which is and the ability to correctly perform emergency procedures at lower altitude where you have less time, airspeed, and altitude to deal with problems is going to be apparent. So the accidental risk increases when you fly lower. But this is going to help us to prepare to do that. In addition to that, this is part of a larger effort to train aviation to fight in large-scale combat operations. And so we have our terrain flight training support package out there, our RF training support package, and our 29 and 3900 series tasks that we're training against radar threats out there, all designed to help us prepare to fight in future highly contested environments because Army aviation in the lower tier of the air domain is decisive, and we know that we have the tactics, techniques, and procedures to be both survivable and decisive in those environments. So as always in Army aviation, we have to focus on the fundamentals. And so while low-level flight is not new to Army aviation, it is new to this generation of Army aviation. And whenever we change the way we do business, there's a standard the way that we do that. We establish the standard and we train so that we can execute that safely and competently and be able to accomplish the military mission for which it's designed. And so this is just one piece of that attempt to get Army aviation prepared for future operations against a higher end threat.
And I would add, this was a deliberate effort to come up with a methodology that could be used in training and in combat. So what would I want the force to know about ERM is that you need to become proficient with this during your training and use the same exact design of the methodology in combat.
Now, we're extremely proud of Army aviation, and we have proven that we can adapt to any situation that we're provided with. We know the conditions that we're going to face in the future, and just like any other point in our history, Army aviation is continuing to adapt to meet those threats in the future, and safely train our aviators to be able to fight, survive, and win in those environments.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the USAACE-8, brought to you by the United States Army Aviation Center of Excellence.